guys, today I am back with some more of Found by Margaret Peterson Haddix. Last time we read, Catherine, Jonah's sister, had stolen some pictures of the papers on Mr. Reardon, the FBI agent's desk. And when Jonah and Chip and Catherine all start looking at the pictures together, they realize that it's lists of survivors and lists of witnesses. They don't know who survived what or what the witnesses witnessed, but they did find Jonah and Chip's names are both on the survivors list. So we are going to pick back up with chapter 13. Close it down, Jonah said. What? Why? Chip asked. Jonah stepped back from the computer, far enough away that the words were just indistinct squiggles. I don't want to know anything else, he said. He felt overwhelmed suddenly, everything catching up with him at once. The strange letters, Mr. Reardon implying he could lose his citizenship and be deported, Catherine claiming she'd seen a ghost, and now these lists of witnesses and survivors, with Jonah's name right there in black and white. It made everything else seem like it might be real. Can't we go back to, hey Jonah, you gonna try out for the basketball team? Jonah pleaded, like that's the most important thing? Chip and Catherine were staring at him like he'd completely lost it. Can't we pretend none of this ever happened? Jonah asked. My parents spent 13 years pretending nothing ever happened, Chip said in a hard voice. Jonah appealed to Catherine. You're the one who said I shouldn't do this whole identity search thing, he said. You wanted me to just act normal. Catherine looked from Jonah to Chip and back again. That was before I saw the ghost, she said quietly, or whatever it was. Aren't you curious? Chip asked. Jonah shook his head. No, not at all. He felt like he was still too close to the computer screen. His mind kept trying to turn the vague squiggles back into words and words into ideas. Survivors. I'm on the survivors list. What does that mean? He reminded himself that he didn't care. He bent over and picked up his jacket. Come on, Catherine, let's go home. Catherine didn't move. I used to want to be you, she said. Excuse me? Jonah asked, almost dropping his jacket in surprise. Not really you, Catherine said. I wanted to be the one who was adopted. I thought it was so boring to have mom and dad as my real parents and my birth parents. I used to pretend that I was adopted and that my other parents were a king and a queen, or actors or singers or something exciting like that. Very nice, Jonah said sarcastically. I'm sure that little fantasy made you very happy. His hand shook as he pulled on his jacket. He stuffed them into his pockets. My other parents were probably drug dealers, he said. Smugglers, wanted by the FBI. Catherine shook her head. You don't know that, she said. Mr. Reardon does. No matter how hard he tried, Jonah couldn't keep the bitterness out of his voice. No, Catherine was staring at him. I don't think so, she said slowly. Didn't you see how Mr. Reardon was looking at you? It was like he was trying to figure you out. Like he doesn't really know who you are either. Thanks a lot, Jonah said. Is that supposed to make me feel better? Catherine put her hand dramatically on Jonah's arm. Wait, she said. I think I just figured something out. Jonah waited. How stupid am I, he thought, that I'm obeying Catherine. Okay, I really think I'm right about this, Catherine said excitedly. See, part of my deal with mom and dad to get to go to the FBI with you was that I wasn't allowed to say anything while we were there. They actually thought you could go 3 seconds without talking? Jonah asked. I didn't talk, Catherine said indignantly. Jonah considered this. He hadn't noticed at the time, but now that he thought about it, he couldn't remember Catherine saying anything in Mr. Reardon's office, just gasping. And it's kind of funny, Catherine went on, but when you're not talking, sometimes you notice things more. And I kept thinking Mr. Reardon was acting weird. No duh, Jonah said. Catherine ignored him. I kept thinking, why did he agree to meet with us just to tell us he couldn't tell us anything? And I think, she dropped her voice low, conspiratorially, I think it was because he wanted to find out what mom and dad already knew. You mean he thought your family knew something the FBI didn't? Chip asked. He'd spun around from the computer screen and was staring up at Catherine as if she had all the answers. Maybe, Catherine said, back to her normal voice. Or he was afraid that we already knew some of that top secret information he didn't want anybody else to know. Didn't you notice how it was almost like he was trying to get mom and dad mad? You know how when people are mad, sometimes they say things they don't mean to, they reveal too much? That's what Mr. Reardon wanted mom and dad to do. Chip was squinting at Catherine. How does that explain the ghost? He asked. That I haven't figured out yet, Catherine said with a little laugh. But I will. She made this whole mess sound as if it was just a challenging math problem, or as if she was working on a scheme to get mom and dad to let her stay up late on a school night, or have nothing but ice cream for dinner. This was just an intriguing puzzle to her. It wasn't her life. Whatever, Jonah said, jerking his arm away from Catherine's grasp. You can stay here until you figure everything out. I'm going home. He half expected Catherine to follow him out. She was his sister, after all, not Chip's friend. But when he glanced back, they both turned around to huddle over the computer together. Fine, Jonah thought, see if I care. When he'd climbed up the stairs to the first level of Chip's house, he could hear a TV siren blaring from the family room. A woman, presumably Chip's mom, said unhappily, "You always have to watch the blood and guts shows." Jonah thought about walking back toward the family room, poking his head in, and informing Chip's parents, "You really ought to know what's going on down in your basement. Chip's looking for a whole other identity that doesn't involve you." Instead, he turned through the dark dining room and slipped out the front door. Outside, a new thought occurred to him. Chip had pretty much admitted he had a crush on Catherine. What if Catherine had a crush on Chip, too? What if that's what this was all about? Unaccountably, Jonah suddenly felt very lonely. He was walking down a dark street, all by himself, the trees casting eerie shadows across the sidewalk. "Hey, kidnappers," he thought, "you want to get me back? This would be a great time to snatch me away." He shivered, even though it wasn't the least bit cold for October. I should have told Mom and Dad, he thought, about that second letter, if nothing else. But he knew why he hadn't. They would have made a federal case out of it, getting upset, calling the cops. Jonah didn't want that. Like Catherine, he wanted Mom and Dad to stay normal. And now he really couldn't tell them, not when they were already so freaked out by the meeting with Mr. Reardon. It would be cruel to spring this on them, too. The street curved slightly, and there was a break in the trees, so he had a full view of his own house. Mom had chrysanthemums planted along the sidewalk and along the front fence, which was actually white picket. Mom and Dad were such believers in all those cliches. The living room bay window curved out invitingly. The lights blazed. Home looked like such a safe place. Jonah just wanted to walk in, crawl into bed, pull the covers over his face, and sleep until all the scary things in his life disappeared. He glanced longingly up at the 2 second-story windows that looked into his room. The lights weren't on in his room, but light was spilling in from the hallway, so he could make out dim shapes. His dresser, his desk, the posts of his bed. One of the shapes in his room moved. While Jonah watched, a dark shape, no, a person, eased the door of Jonah's room shut, blocking out the light, plunging the windows into complete darkness. But then, a smaller light, a flashlight, a pen light, clicked on, hovering over Jonah's desk. Jonah took off running. Chapter 14. Jonah burst in through the front door. "Mom? Dad?" he called accusingly. If they were snooping in his room, he was going to be really angry. He hadn't started flunking out of school as a cry for help. There was no reason to search through his things. Mom peeked out from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Dad and I are back here," she said. Jonah sped around the corner, saw Dad sitting at the computer. Dad hastily clicked out of whatever he was looking at, but not before Jonah caught a glimpse of the FBI crest. "Thanks, Dad. You really think you have to hide that from me?" Jonah decided he didn't have time to think about that right now. "Then who's in my room?" he demanded. "No one's in your room," Mom said, sounding baffled. Jonah whirled around and rushed up the stairs. He shoved open the door to his room, flipped on the light. Nobody was there. Jonah jerked the closet door open. He got down on his hands and knees and looked under the bed. He looked beside his desk, behind the door, all the places he'd ever used during hide-and-seek games when he was little. "Jonah, honey, what are you doing?" Mom asked, appearing in his doorway. "I thought I saw someone in my room," Jonah said, "when I was outside." Mom peeked into the closet and under the bed. "There's nobody here," she said. She took in a shaky breath. "Really, Jonah, if there had been an intruder, we would have heard him. You know how those stairs creak." Maybe whoever it was didn't use the stairs, Jonah thought. Maybe he used a ladder at the back of the house. Or maybe it was someone who could just appear and disappear at will, like Catherine's ghost. Jonah didn't want to think about that, but he also didn't go to the back of the house to look for a ladder. Dad walked into the room and laid his hands comfortingly on Mom's shoulders. "Jonah, if you really thought there was an intruder, you shouldn't have come rushing up here, putting yourself in danger. You should have called the police," he said. Jonah sat down on his bed. "It was just my imagination, I guess," he said sulkily. "If I'd called the police, they would have been mad." "But you would have been safe," Dad said. Mom sat down beside Jonah on the bed. She patted his shoulder. "You've just had a hard day," she said. "It's been a little overwhelming for all of us." "Yeah," Jonah said absently. He was facing his desk, where he'd dumped the contents of his backpack after school, before they'd gone to see Mr. Reardon. Jonah hadn't been able to concentrate on homework, not enough to do it, and certainly not enough to put it all in a tidy stack, so he had a half-finished math sheet sliding into the paper, giving instructions for his next language arts paragraph, sliding into a sheet announcing the school's Halloween dance. But that wasn't what Jonah was looking at. On top of those papers, Jonah could see another one that was half folded up, as if it had just been removed from an envelope. He wasn't at the right angle to see everything written on the half-folded paper, but he could see a little bit. Beware. It was one of those mysterious letters he'd received, which he knew he'd left in the back of his top drawer, under his collection of state quarters. Jonah remembered the tiny light hovering over his desk that he'd seen from outside. "Are you sure you weren't in here a few moments ago, right before I got home?" Jonah asked his parents. Suddenly, he wanted to believe they'd been searching through his room, snooping around. It was better than any of the other possibilities. "Jonah, we weren't," Dad said. "Neither one of us has been upstairs since before dinner." Jonah could barely remember dinner. He and Catherine had rushed through the leftover chili so they could get to Chip's house. Dad was peering at him with a concerned squint, worry lines ringing his eyes. "Is something wrong?" Mom asked. Something we don't already know about?" Was that the opening Jonah wanted? He did want to tell Mom and Dad about the letters. Let them worry, so he wouldn't have to. But the tale of the letters now involved disappearing ghosts, and Catherine taking cell phone pictures of secret documents with Jonah's name on them, and witnesses as if Jonah had been involved in some crime. "Nothing's wrong," Jonah said. He yawned unconvincingly. "I'm just tired." Mom and Dad were both still looking at him doubtfully, but it seemed like they were willing to play along. "Maybe you should go to bed early," Mom said. Mom was big on the curative powers of sleep. Jonah was surprised she didn't add, "Everything will look better in the morning." Instead, she said, "I'm glad you came back from Chip's. Was Catherine with you? I didn't see her." She looked around as if, having acted so worried about Jonah, she now had to show the same amount of concern about her daughter. "She's still at Chip's," Jonah said. By her face, Jonah thought he could practically see the calculation going on in Mom's head. Goodness, there couldn't be anything romantic going on between those two, could there? She's only in 6th grade. But this is an older boy. "She's got the cell phone with her, doesn't she?" Mom asked with studied casualness. "I think I'll give her a call, tell her to come home. It's almost 9 o'clock. "I'll go get her," Jonah volunteered. He was still a little mad at his sister, but somehow he didn't want her walking home alone along the dark street with all its eerie shadows, which was crazy because he was the one who'd gotten the threatening letters. Of course, she was the one who thought she'd seen a ghost. "Would you do that?" Mom asked. "Thanks." Jonah waited until Mom and Dad were out of his room before he tucked the mysterious letter back into his drawer. Then he went outside. He was nearly back to Chip's house when he saw Catherine slipping out of the Winstons' front door. "Tomorrow," she was promising Chip, "we'll solve this. We will." Jonah waited until Chip had shut the door and Catherine was stepping out onto the sidewalk. He hid behind a maple tree, then jumped out just as Catherine was passing by. "Boo!" Catherine shrieked and she giggled and pounded her fists against Jonah's chest. "I hate you," she screamed, laughing. "You're terrible." Jonah almost laughed too, because it felt so good to treat everything like a joke, to pretend he wasn't worried about anything. And, fortunately, Catherine's fists didn't hurt at all. She wasn't hitting very hard. "Just for that, I'm not going to tell you what Chip and I found out," Catherine threatened. "Good. I don't want to know anyhow," Jonah said. "Remember?" "Okay, then, just for that, I'll tell you everything," Catherine corrected herself. "Chip and I called every name on the witnesses list." Jonah thought about putting his hands over his ears and chanting, I'm not listening, la 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 la," but he couldn't quite bring himself to do that. "2 of the people just hung up on us," Catherine continued, "but I did get one guy to tell me he worked as an air traffic controller. I was pretending I was working on a career project for school. I was supposed to call people at random and talk to them about their jobs. He was really friendly and wanted to talk and talk and talk. Air traffic controllers must not get out much. But then I said, 'Did you ever witness anything unusual, like maybe 13 years ago or so?' And he got really, really quiet. And then he said he had to go. He didn't have time to talk to me." "That means something, don't you think?" "No," Jonah said automatically, because he didn't want to believe that any of this meant anything. And then this other lady, Angela Dupree, her name was first on the list. She sounded perfectly normal when Chip first started talking to her. But then he laid everything on the line about how he just found out he was adopted, he didn't know anything about his birth parents, he thought she might know something, and then she just totally freaked out. She started hyperventilating almost, and she said, "I can't talk to you, don't ever call me again." Weird, huh? It was all weird, Jonah thought, stepping in and out of the shadows. He wanted to find normal explanations. "Well, maybe she gave up a baby for adoption," he said. "Maybe it was like 13 years ago, and so she thought Chip might be her son, and it was all too emotional for her. You know how some birth parents want to reunite with their kids, and some never want to have anything to do with them. They just want to pretend nothing ever happened." For the first time, Jonah actually kind of understood that viewpoint. Something else struck him. Hey, Maybe she really is Chip's birth mother, or mine. Maybe that's what witnesses really meant, like it's a code word or something. I don't think so, Catherine said. Why not? Jonah challenged. It just didn't seem like that, Catherine said. Oh, right, you know all about these things, Jonah scoffed. But his heart wasn't into it, because they'd reached the point on the street where he could see into his bedroom windows, where he'd been standing where he'd seen the intruder before. He couldn't help staring up at the windows now, but they were blank and dark and empty. He didn't tell Catherine about the intruder. He wouldn't tell her or Chip, and maybe he could forget about it himself. Jonah, Catherine said earnestly, Chip and I really are going to figure all this out, and when we do, you'll thank us. You'll be so happy, you'll be at peace. They were at the front door now. Jonah put his hand on the doorknob. Home, which had looked like such a safe place before, was now just a place where he might see ghosts, where he had to worry about their secrets being pulled out for anyone to see, where he had to worry about Mom and Dad worrying about him. He already felt haunted. Catherine, he said. What? She turned to him eagerly. You don't know what you're talking about. Alright, so that's where we're going to stop for today, and I hope that next time we read, we might figure out whether Jonah's going to stick with his I don't want to know anything about anything stance, or if maybe Chip and Catherine will change his mind. Alright, stay tuned for tomorrow's video, guys, and we will see if we can find out. Bye!